In the year 13 AD, a 75-year-old man sat down and wrote his own resume. Then he had it carved into bronze and set up outside his own tomb, so that Romans would walk past it for the next 1,000 years and think, what a guy. 35 paragraphs. Wars finished, temples repaired, money handed out, grain for the poor, games for everyone else. It is a magnificent document, and it is the most successful lie by omission ever committed to metal. Because the bronze leaves out the 2,000 men he had killed to pay for his career. It leaves out the hands he nailed to a public platform. It leaves out 3 days he spent lying in a swamp during the most important battle of his life. And it leaves out the best trick anyone has ever pulled in politics. The Roman Republic did not die fighting. It died being thanked for its service. This is the boy who became a god, and everything he kept off the bronze. March 44 BC. You already know what just happened in that Senate room because we spent a whole video on it, 23 times. 400 miles east, in a training camp on the Adriatic coast, an 18-year-old was doing military drills he was far too sickly to enjoy. Gaius Octavius. Occupation? Grandnephew. Third row at family gatherings. The kind of relative who gets remembered in a will with something polite and small. Caesar's will did two things instead. It gave the boy 3/4 of the largest fortune in Rome and, the part that actually mattered, it adopted him, posthumously, as a son. Which meant an 18-year-old with a weak chest and no army now legally owned the most dangerous word in the Mediterranean. His mother and stepfather begged him to refuse the whole thing. Their argument was strong. Everyone who had recently carried that name was now dead, and the people who arranged that were still armed and still in Rome. He took the name that afternoon. 18 years old. No troops, no office, no reputation, and a body that caught something serious roughly twice a year. He had exactly one asset, and it was a word. So he went to Rome and started spending it. Caesar had promised his veterans a cash bonus in that will. 300 sesterces a man, 20,000 men. Mark Antony, who was holding Caesar's money at the time, had quietly decided the money was now Antony's. So the boy sold his own inherited property and paid the veterans himself. 20,000 armed men learned two facts that week. The kid honors Caesar's promises, and Antony doesn't. That was not generosity. That was a recruitment campaign with a receipt. Antony's opinion of him is on record. Boy, you owe everything to a name. He was right, and that was the problem. Being right about it changed nothing. Meanwhile, the Senate had its own plan, and it belonged to Cicero, the finest speaker in Rome and a man who could not resist a clever line. His idea was to use the teenager as a blade against Antony and dispose of him afterward. He described the policy in public. The young man should be praised, decorated, and raised up. The Latin word he chose for raised up, tollendum, also means removed. Cicero thought this was the funniest thing he had ever said. He repeated it at dinner parties. Write that one down. It comes back with interest. The Senate sent the boy north with an army to fight Antony, which worked. Antony was beaten. Both consuls then died in the fighting, which was extremely convenient for exactly one person, and left a 19-year-old standing in northern Italy in charge of 8 legions with nobody above him. He wrote to the Senate and asked to be made consul, the top job, minimum legal age, 43. The Senate replied that he was 19. He replied that he had 8 legions. The Senate congratulated him warmly on his election. Before we go on, one question, and I want a real answer out of you. This man ends up running the Roman world for 40 years and gets voted into the state religion. How many battles did he personally win? 20 plus, a genuine war machine. About 6, a respectable record. Or essentially none. Say it out loud, nobody's listening. Decided? Good. Essentially none. Keep that in your pocket. It gets funnier every time it comes up. Here the bronze goes very quiet. Antony had an army, the boy had an army, and a third man named Lepidus had an army, and no particular plan for it. So instead of fighting each other, the three of them met on an island in a river and divided the Roman world into thirds. Officially, it was an emergency commission for restoring the state. In practice, it was three men agreeing on who gets which countries. Their first joint act was a list of names. Rome had done this before. Sulla published the original version, and we walked through it in the Caesar video. Somebody had kept a copy of the paperwork. Proscription works like this. You publish names. Anyone on the list can be legally killed by anybody, and whoever does it collects a reward out of the dead man's estate. Around 300 senators. Around 2,000 of the richest men in Italy. It was never really about politics. It was about cash flow. Armies need paying every month, and the fastest way to fund one is to make wealthy people illegal and inherit them. Slaves who informed on their masters were freed and paid. Sons informed on fathers. It worked precisely as designed, and that is the part worth sitting with. Each of the three had to surrender someone the others wanted. Antony wanted one name above all others, and it was Cicero, the man whose speeches had built the boy's entire career. The boy argued for 2 days. Then he signed. Cicero was caught on the road, trying to reach a ship. He leaned out of the litter and told the soldiers to get on with it. They took his head and they took his hands, the hands that had written every speech, and fixed them to the speaker's platform in the forum, where he had delivered all of them. So, praised, decorated, and raised up. The teenager got the last word on that joke. He was 19 years old. 19. He handed over the man who made him to a man who hated them both in exchange for staying alive one more year. I want your verdict now before you know how the story ends. Is that a monster? Or is that a kid who read the rules faster than every adult in the room? Comments. Go. Then came the revenge campaign. Brutus and Cassius had gone east and raised a real army, and everyone met at Philippi in northern Greece in 42 BC. What followed is, without exaggeration, one of the worst personal performances in military history. He was ill again. His doctor announced he'd had a warning dream and the camp was unsafe, the sort of medical advice that arrives after a decision, not before it. He left. Brutus's men took the camp and stabbed his empty stretcher to be certain. And the future founder of the Roman Empire spent the next 3 days hiding in a marsh. Antony, on the other side of the field, won the battle. Then won the second one too, a few weeks later, while the boy was still recovering from having been horizontal in a swamp. Remember the quiz? This is answer C, arriving early. With the assassins dead, the three partners hit the problem every partnership hits. There was no longer enough work for three of them. Antony took the wealthy east. Lepidus took Africa. The boy took Italy, which sounds like the prize until you remember what Italy actually contained. Every unpaid veteran, every angry taxpayer, and a permanent food shortage. The food shortage had a name, Sextus Pompey, son of Pompey the Great. And if you watch the Spartacus video, that's the one with the hair who turned up at the end of somebody else's war to collect the credit. The son had inherited the fleet, taken Sicily, and was strangling Rome's grain shipments for leverage. The response was to build a navy and go and deal with him. That navy lost. So a second one was built. A storm ate it. At which point the most important person in this entire story finally walks in, and it isn't Augustus. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Same age, school friend, no money, no famous ancestors, and one of the finest military engineers who has ever lived. Handed a naval disaster, Agrippa did not order more ships, he built a harbor. He cut a channel through a sandbar, joined 2 inland lakes to the sea, and trained an entire fleet inside them where nobody could watch it and nobody could reach it. Then he designed a weapon for the specific problem, a grapple fired from a catapult, so heavy fast ships could be pinned by slow ones, and at Naulacus, he destroyed Sextus's fleet with it. 29 years old, both of them. One of them was doing the work. Lepidus chose that exact week to announce that he should be in charge, and ordered his legions to arrest his junior partner. The junior partner walked into Lepidus's camp alone and began a conversation with the soldiers about who had been paying their wages. They changed sides while he was standing in front of them. Lepidus lost everything except the title of chief priest and was sent to a comfortable house in the countryside where he lived quietly for another 24 years. He wasn't executed. He was moved sideways into a role with no direct reports. 2 men left, and Antony was in Egypt with Cleopatra, committing the one unforgivable Roman sin, being visibly happier somewhere else. He handed Roman territory to their children at a public ceremony in Alexandria. He put Cleopatra's face on coins. He stayed away, year after year, while his rival stayed in Rome doing the paperwork and being seen at festivals. And the boy, who knew perfectly well he could not beat Antony in a straight fight, beat him at the one skill where he had no equal in the ancient world, telling Romans a story they wanted to believe. He obtained Antony's will. It was sealed, and it was being kept by the Vestal Virgins in the one building in Rome that no politician was permitted to touch. He took it, carried it into the Senate, and read it aloud. It said Antony wished to be buried in Alexandria, not Rome, Alexandria. So the man who had just robbed a temple stood in the Senate and explained, with real sadness, that his opponent had stopped being properly Roman. And Rome believed him. That is the whole man, in one room, in one afternoon. 31 BC. Both sides brought everything to the west coast of Greece. Antony had more ships, and bigger ones, and a queen financing the whole operation. The other side had Agrippa. Agrippa did not attack the fleet. He went after the food. He took the supply islands one at a time until Antony's enormous navy was parked in a bay with nothing coming in, and then he waited while malaria worked through the rowers. By the time anyone fought anything, a third of Antony's crews were dead or gone, and he was burning his own ships because there was nobody left to row them. The most famous naval battle in Roman history is therefore less a battle than a divorce with catapults. Halfway through, Cleopatra's squadron raised sail and ran for Egypt. Antony, in command, mid-engagement with 19 legions watching from the shore, went after her. His fleet surrendered that day. His army waited a week for orders that never came, and then walked home. A year later, Alexandria fell. Antony was given a false report that Cleopatra was already dead and stabbed himself. Badly. He was carried, still alive, to where she was, in fact, still alive, and died there. Whatever you think of the man, he received the worst available version of every ending on offer. Cleopatra negotiated for several days, understood she was going to be walked through Rome in chains as part of a parade, and killed herself instead. Now, the snake. The snake is almost certainly fiction. The asp turns up in Roman writers working generations later, who needed an Egyptian queen to die by an Egyptian royal symbol. It's too neat, and our earliest sources already contradict each other. No snake was found. Cleopatra had spent years studying poisons in genuine detail, and the likeliest answer is the boring one. She used what she knew. One person remained who was genuinely dangerous: Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, 17 years old, and by his mother's account, the biological child of Julius Caesar, which made him a teenager with a stronger claim to the name than the man who had built an entire career on inheriting it. The advice given was 3 words: too many Caesars. The boy was hunted down and killed. Egypt did not become a province. It became personal property, the richest country on the Mediterranean, owned outright by a 32-year-old. So he had won. Every legion, every province, every coin, no rivals left alive. Which is precisely the position his adoptive father occupied, right up until 23 of his colleagues solved it with knives. Caesar's fatal error was never power. It was looking like a king while holding it. So his heir did the cleverest thing anyone has ever done in public life. He gave everything back. 27 BC, in front of the Senate, he resigned. All commands, all provinces, all extraordinary powers handed back to the Republic. The Republic was restored. He was a private citizen with a nice house. The Senate reacted the way any room reacts when the man holding 60 legions offers to become unemployed. They begged him to reconsider. He declined. They insisted. He accepted, with visible reluctance, purely for the good of Rome, a modest package of provinces for 10 years only, and only the difficult ones: Egypt, Syria, Gaul, Spain. Which, by an extraordinary accident of geography, is where almost every soldier in the Roman army happened to be standing. The Senate kept the peaceful provinces, which contained essentially no troops at all. Everyone went home delighted. The Republic was back. Consuls, elections, debates, courts, all of it, for another 400 years. Nobody ever disagreed with him about anything important again. They voted him a new name to mark the occasion: Augustus. It isn't a job title, it's an adjective. And before him, you mostly used it for temples. His actual constitutional position was princeps, first citizen. Just an ordinary man, just the first one, of all of them, permanently. And if a man dismantling a republic while insisting loudly that he is rescuing it rings a bell, we have an entire video about a short Frenchman who ran this same play 18 centuries later, and also ended up wearing a crown he swore he never wanted. And then, having stolen a state, he ran it extremely well for 40 years. That's the genuinely annoying part. Roads, aqueducts, a fire brigade, a police force, a courier service, and a professional army with a funded pension. That last one mattered more than all the marble, because it meant soldiers stopped being personally loyal to whichever general promised them farmland. He liked to say he had found Rome a city of brick, and left it a city of marble. True. He also founded a republic, and left it an empire. And that line appears in smaller print. 2 centuries of relative peace across the Mediterranean began here, and millions of people lived longer, calmer lives because of it. That peace was purchased by a machine that had once auctioned 2,000 of its own citizens to cover payroll. Neither fact cancels the other, and I'm not going to pretend one of them isn't there. There was exactly one problem he could not outthink. He could not keep an heir alive. His nephew Marcellus died at 19. His grandsons Gaius and Lucius, groomed from childhood for decades, died at 23 and 18. And Agrippa, the man who had won every battle in this story on his behalf, died in bed in 12 BC, aged 51, which was the single most inconvenient thing he ever did. The most patient planner Rome ever produced, spent 40 years arranging his succession and buried every candidate on the list. What he had left was his wife's son from her first marriage, a gloomy, resentful, extremely capable man called Tiberius, whom he did not like and did not want. You have probably heard that his wife Livia poisoned her way through those heirs to clear a path for her son. There is no evidence for it. That version comes from later writers who preferred a villain to a coincidence, plus one very good television series. Ancient Rome killed healthy young people constantly and for free. She did outlive nearly everybody, which is suspicious, although so is eating vegetables. 14 AD. 75 years old, in the same bedroom where his father had died. He asked for a mirror and had his hair combed. Then he asked the friends around the bed whether he had played his part well in the comedy of life, and told them to applaud as he left the stage. He knew. He always knew. 40 years of insisting the Republic was alive and healthy, performed with total commitment in front of an audience that very much wanted to believe it. The Senate then voted him into the state religion. The boy who inherited a name finished as an official god. So, back to the bronze. 35 paragraphs. Wars, temples, grain, games, all of it true. None of it invented. Missing from the bronze. The list. Cicero's hands on the platform. 3 days in a marsh. Every battle Agrippa fought for him. A will stolen out of a temple. And a 17-year-old with the wrong surname. The Roman Republic wasn't murdered. It was retired. With full honors, warm speeches, and a generous pension. And it kept turning up at the office for 400 years so that nobody had to admit it had no work left to do. So, back to the question from the middle of the video. You already gave me a verdict on a 19-year-old who traded away his mentor to survive one more year. Now you know he spent the next 50 building the most effective state in the ancient world, and that millions of people were safer for it. Does the verdict change? Does it count as an excuse if it worked? Tell me in the comments. I read them. Here's what he really built, though, and it wasn't the marble. He built a system so well designed that it could run without him, which also means it could run without anyone competent at all. 50 years later, Rome put that to the test, with a young man who believed sincerely that he was an artist. Subscribe. Next time, the emperor who fiddled while Rome burned. He didn't. What he actually did is worse. And go and update your own resume this week. Leave a few things out. You'd be in excellent company. Not in the resume. Падает последний раз и остается в кадре.